So we are going to move on now to butterflies, and I'm going to introduce you to Ron Rutowski, who is one of our research partners. He's actually been a partner with the Parsons Field Institute since our very first project, which was to do a baseline inventory of flora and fauna in the preserve in 2011 through 2013. And he stuck around as a research partner for our butterfly work, and he also serves on our science advisory committee. So Ron worked at ASU and the School of Life Sciences for 40 years. And then even after retiring, he is still active in research and in teaching. Ron's work really focuses on bright coloration in animals. He's working to understand the function and the perception. And with that, he specializes in butterflies. So we're really, really pleased to have him be part of our work. And Ron, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
It should be up there. Can you see it?
It is not sharing.
Oh, no, that's strange.
It's technology.
Hang on, just a second. Yeah, just a moment, please. I had thought I had told it to share. Let's try this one more time.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Well, sorry about that little glitch. Hello, everybody. Good to see and hear you all. Today, my job is to give a brief overview of the butterfly monitoring program that we have on the preserve. And my intention is to first tell you something about the history and the rationale for the project, and then to tell you something just overview a little bit some of the protocol and procedures that we use in the project. Then I want to show you some of the results that we've gotten over the last 7 or 8 years, and then finally to talk a little bit about some broader implications with respect to how this connects or might be informed or inform some other regional studies of butterfly abundance and diversity. So as Tiffany suggested, I first got involved with the preserve as part of the initial survey of the flora and fauna that was done in the years from 2011 to 2013. And of course, the end result of that was this report that came out on the flora and fauna of the McDowell Sonoran Preserve. And in that report, we listed 28 species of butterflies that had been seen or identified on the preserve. Now, after this initial report, the Conservancy, the preserve, got very interested in establishing some monitoring programs so we could see how the flora and fauna were changing over longer periods of time. And butterflies became part of the overall monitoring program, which, as we've heard today, also includes monitoring programs for birds, bats, amphibians, plants. And butterflies were chosen because they constitute a pretty good indicator taxon. First of all, they're conspicuous and easy to count, so it's not too difficult to get a bunch of people and go out and start counting butterflies. If you do this on a regular basis, you can get a sense of how the populations are growing or declining over time. Also, butterflies rely heavily on the plant community, both for nectar sources and for larval food plants. And so they are a good indication of sort of the health of the plant community as well. Another thing, and I say this unabashedly, butterflies are highly charismatic organisms that people really love and are interested in. So it's not too difficult to engage volunteers, stewards and others to participate in the counts. And then lastly, there is a nationwide, actually North America-wide program of counts that's been going on for, I think it's now 30 or 40 years. And this program is now administered by the North American Butterfly Association, and and part of the program are contributors to the program are all of these spots shown, are counts done in all of these spots shown on the map. So there's about 450 sites in the US, Canada, and northern Mexico where people go out counting butterflies at least once a year. And these data are entered into the North American Butterfly Association's count database and are being used for research purposes to look at seasonal trends in butterfly abundance and diversity, or I'm sorry, yearly long-term trends in butterfly abundance and diversity throughout North America. So we thought we could connect with that as well. And also the North American Butterfly Association has a series of protocols and guidelines that we could quickly plug into and follow. So we started the butterfly counts in 2014, 17 years ago. Initially, the counts were done just in the fall for the first 3 years or so in late September. In 2017, it was decided just to get an even larger picture of the butterfly abundance and diversity on the preserve, we would establish a spring count. So that was done again in 2017. It's been running for about 5 years now. The butterfly counts have turned out to be a good community science thing. We have not only local experts that are involved, there's steward leads, and then there's stewards that and other people who participate as well, including there's been students from Scottsdale Community College and other places. So as a community science project, it's been good. The count protocol has been, we've developed that, and it's been refined in the various reiterations of the count. We now, I think, have quite a good process in place, protocol in place. We have 7 established routes that are well mapped out, and there are guidelines for how to count, when to count, and all of that I think are making the results very nicely repeatable and rigorous. The results themselves are held or curated by the Parsons Field Institute, and they're also, as I indicated, shared with the North American Butterfly Association's database on butterfly counts. So I won't go into too much more detail about the actual process of the count, but give you a sense of what some of the results and trends that we've seen look like. First of all, since that initial flora and fauna survey, we've added something on the order of, we've basically doubled the number of species we've seen on the preserve. And we have now counted over 7,000 individual butterflies over the 12 counts that have been run on the preserve. The typical fall count, and then there's these graphs, what you can see is the number of, for example, the left-hand one, the number of species plotted against the year in which the count was done. And I show, at least for the last 5 years, both the spring and the fall counts. And then, so number of species is one of our metrics. Another is the number of individual butterflies observed on a count. And we see those numbers here. Several things you can say about these numbers. First of all, the typical fall count yields about 20 species and about 500 individuals. And the typical spring count yields about the same number of species, about 20 species, although they're not necessarily the same species that we see in the fall. There are some seasonal patterns of butterfly diversity on the preserve. And we typically in the spring see about 750 individuals, or have seen about 750 individuals. So the spring seems to be a little more productive. One of the key things that you can see from these graphs is there's a tremendous amount of year-to-year variation in abundance and diversity. So some of the counts that we've done, frustrating as they've been, have been as low as 25 individual butterflies. You know, we've got 7 places we sample, and we only came up in some counts with 25 individuals total. The full range is from 25 up to 2,000. And as you can see, that 2,000 was in the spring of 2019. And the diversity shows also shows it's a lot of variation. Some counts have been as low as 5 species. The highest number we've had has been 35. So there's a lot of variation here that we're still trying to understand. I'll get to that more a little later. Fall and spring counts, you can also see here, are not really correlated. So that, for example, in 2019 here, in terms of the number of species, there were about 35 species seen in the spring count, but only about 18 or so in the fall. And this is the usual thing, that the number of counts that we see, for example, in the spring doesn't predict well what we're going to see that fall. I just wanted to show you this quickly. This just shows you the relative abundance on a given count of the different species of butterflies. So this is this histogram of the abundance of the 20 some odd species seen on the 2020 spring count. And so you can see that two of the species were the spring azure and the checkered white were quite abundant with counts of 160 or more for each of these species. There are others that were also seen in numbers that go up in the tens of 20s or 30s or 40s, but there's a large number of species where you only see one or two individuals. And this is very typical of the counts. I won't go into the reasons why this might be, but it's typical that on a given count, we have a few species, a half dozen, maybe a couple of more that are relatively numerous, and a bunch that you hardly see any of. If we look for the fall counts at what species are abundant, we tend to find these 6 species on almost all counts and in relatively good numbers. You can see that one of the most abundant butterflies that we see during the fall counts is this one, the sleepy orange. It's the top dark blue line here. Oh. And you can see how its numbers vary, but it's generally one of the more numerous butterflies we see on counts. Other species are less common, but still more common than these ones where we see 1 or 2. But many of them show much less year-to-year variation in their numbers in the fall count. So for example, the Empress Laelia, which is this butterfly down here, and which is the orange line running through the plot there, typically 100 or less, but it's pretty consistent that they're out there in a few tens of individuals. The Mormon meadowlark, which is up here on the upper right, is also one of these ones that's consistently out there, but often not in huge numbers, but in notable numbers. So that's another sort of characteristic of the counts, and suggests that some of the species are more variable than year to year than others, and perhaps more sensitive to some of the environmental variables that affect their numbers out there. So this sort of species-based conclusions, I think, is going to become increasingly important as we go on here. I just wanted to point out too that if we look across the sites, and there are 5 sites that have been sampled in all of the fall counts: Dixie Mine, 128th Street Tank, Tom's Thumb Canyon, Landslide Trail, Brown's Ranch, Road and Mountain. You can see that there is some variation in a given year, like 2018 here. There's some variation in which area produced the greatest number of species. It's not always consistent, although it does appear that Brown's Ranch and the Tom's Thumb Canyon are 2 of the sites that we visit that often produce the highest numbers of butterflies. Dixie Mine, 128th Street Tank, fewer, but in some cases it's not the same species that you find in both cases. But in general, in a given year, the abundance and diversity is similar among sites, and the ways in which it changes from year to year appears also to be true across sites. So how does it, I could go on and on about these sorts of numbers and stuff, but it's an interesting question as to how does this connect with what we understand that's going on with butterflies more generally. Helen alluded to the fact that arthropods are on decline worldwide and other organisms. And in fact, there's this paper that just came out a couple of months ago from Matt Forrester and a group of co-authors. Matt Forrester is a conservation biologist who works with butterflies at the University of Nevada, Reno. And as you can see from the title, what they found is that Community science programs or citizen science programs like our butterfly counts have been seeing fewer and fewer butterflies as the American West tends to warm and dry. So again, they suggest that butterfly numbers have been declining across the entire West. They've used the NAVA database as one of the databases to support to test this conclusion or come up with this result. And they have found some pretty strong correlations between warming, higher temperatures, and drying, lower precipitation as a cause. I'm maybe not happy to report, but I can report that our results, even though they're from such a limited time period of 7 years, are sort of falling in line with this. So here, what I've plotted is the number of species, one of our metrics, against the rainfall. These are for fall counts. So number of species plotted against the rainfall during the summer preceding the fall count. And we get quite a significant positive correlation. That is, the more rainfall that we get in the monsoons, the more species we see on the butterfly counts. Similar correlation for the number of individuals seen on the count. I will point out that in the analysis I did, I threw out this data point because that was the one year when the snout butterflies had a huge population explosion. And I think of the 1,000 butterflies or so we observed, 800 of them were snouts. It was something like that. I can't remember, but that was sort of a aberrant year, and so wasn't really included in the analysis. But we get a very similar set of results for the spring counts, even though we only have five counts, spring counts that have been done so far for the number of species. If we look at how that's related to the winter rains, the rain that falls between October and March preceding the count in early April, we get again a significant positive correlation. Number of individuals, again, a significant positive correlation in how the number of individuals that's affected by winter rains. So in general, we're getting results even on the short term that are consistent with this, the results of this recent report on how butterfly numbers are changing in the West as apparently as a result of climate change. I will point out that they didn't use our data for the preserve because they didn't use any data set that was less than 10 years. And many of the data sets they use span 30 or 40 years or even more. So in summary, then, I think the counts are proceeding well. The organization is going smoothly, largely thanks to the steward leads that I've had the chance to work with during the course of the butterfly account program. The data collection and summary I think has gotten quite streamlined, and we have a great system for entering data into spreadsheets that we can use in the preserve and also for going to NAVA. And there's been really good community involvement. We've had as many as, COVID brought the numbers of community participants down to about 15 per count, but we're previous to that, and hopefully in the future to come, we've had as many as 30 to 50 people involved in the count, a given count. The implications are, I think, that it's too soon to detect long-term changes, so we need to stick at this, even though the numbers have been low for the last few counts. Hopefully they'll come up again, but it's important for us to quantitatively document this. The positive effects of rainfall on butterfly abundance and diversity on the preserve, I think, are pretty clear at this point. And these relationships will allow us to anticipate what the effects of climate change might be on butterflies overall, as well as on specific species. So just to wrap it up, I want to thank all the participants, and I want to especially thank the steward leads. There have been 6 of them over the years, most recently Doug Jensen, but they've all just done a wonderful job of pulling this all together. So I'll take questions or comments now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ron. Unfortunately, we are running low on time. Too much great information there, but I do encourage people, you're welcome to still put questions in the chat and we'll save them. We can address those either during the break or after everything is done. But thanks so much, Ron. That was a great presentation.
Mm-hmm.